So I think that a lot of my work today has actually been formed around the formation of my family. I have twin brothers who are now well into their 30s, but they were IVF babies, and at the time it was pretty experimental. And my parents really engaged me with that process and were really open, even though I was just a kid. And so I had this really deep understanding of the power of technology from the time that I was pretty little, because I understood that my family was made in a dish, or at least that is how I pictured it in my head as a kid. And so this relationship between technology and how we move through life and health all was seeded pretty early for me, I think. I thought that I was going to study science, and so I studied physiology. But the more that I studied physiology, the more that I became interested in the connection between culture and health. And so I went on to study intercultural communications for grad school. And while I was in grad school, my boyfriend at the time, who's still my partner today, he was apprenticing to become a goldsmith. And I saw the chief technical advisor of the United Nations Industrial Development Organization speak at a conference on mercury use in gold mining. And this was a whole new world for me. And I went home to Kev and said, I met this guy. He's super interesting. I think that we should learn more. And because we were just kids and we really didn't know how large governmental organizations worked, we just reached out and said, can we take you for a beer? Because we thought that that was how you started these kinds of relationships. And it turned out that in our case, it really was. That was the start of this intersection of both of our passions around jewelry and gold mining, in my case, health and culture and technology. That was it really was my applied intercultural experience, was working in mining communities with the UN and other organizations. So I've had this story for a long time that serendipity was really this grand choreographer over the course of my career, that so much of where I am today was a function of who I met, whose path I crossed, these random introductions. And what that meant for me is that when I looked to my past, I was just so full of gratitude for the people that came into my life and the adventures that I had. When I looked to my present, I was often mostly just vaguely confused and surprised about where I was, which was fine because I really liked novelty. But when I looked to my future, I had quite a bit of anxiety because I didn't know how you planned for serendipity. And then one day I learned about the etymology of serendipity, about where the word comes from. And it first shows up in this fairy tale, this Persian fairy tale about these three princes that travel through the Isle of Serendip, which today we know to be Sri Lanka. And the superpower that these three princes have on this voyage are powers of observation. And they end up going on sort of these tangential paths, but those paths end up being really critical to finishing the quest that they are on. And that was really helpful for me to be able to reframe where I had come from, because I didn't have to see my path as being strictly this function of a stroke of luck, but also a function of observation and openness to new paths. And so I think that's largely how I ended up here. From mining, a random conversation at Summit led me into the world of space mining, where I've worked in policy and space mining and research for a few years before moving into data mining in neurotechnology, before moving into data mining in the context of AI and looking at all of these systems of extraction and how they intersect sort of socially and ecologically, and what this means for both our present day and our future. The very transparent reason I am a polymath, I think, is a function of imposter syndrome. That to come into a new space, I'm often not sure what I have to bring or what it means to be engaging with expertise. But being a polymath has allowed me to, I think, seed ideas and experience and knowledge from different spaces into new spaces, which I think has allowed me to provide a different level of value and kind of circumvent questions that I've had around my own confidence. That's my very honest answer. Additionally, I truly believe in the power of interdisciplinary experience and community and collaboration. I truly believe that the impact is exponential. I believe that the role that polymaths have to play in addressing the climate crisis is a function of being able to meet complexity with complexity. The climate crisis is not going to be solved in silos. It's going to be solved in collaboration and across different spaces, and we need folks who can be bridges. I think that the way that we talk about technology, the way that we talk about how we operate in the cloud, really disassociates us from the physicality of technology. My work in mining was very much grounded literally in the ground. It was about the ground. You could not escape the materiality of that work and the materiality of the consequences of that work. Because of the language that we use, though, to describe technology, I think often we actually don't have a sense of how we're connected to that technology in actually really similar ways. Our technology is heavily dependent on the ground, is heavily dependent on our minerals and our resources and our water. In so many ways, it actually has the same kind of physical construction as a lot of my former work in mining. And I think one of the things that I'm interested in and I'm passionate about is helping us to understand that our digital world really is very much a physical world as well. We live at such an interesting time. I belong to a generation that straddles this really powerful moment in time where I grew up before the internet and also during the internet. And I think for a long time that has really defined my experience culturally as an elder millennial. I think that we all right now are also occupying a similar space with AI, where AI has been around for a little while, but right now, over the course of the last 18 months in particular, we've really experienced this massive shift in understanding of the scale of impact that AI is going to have in our lives. And I think that we're not on the other side of that yet. I think most of us are still learning and figuring out what this means for us in the long run. I think we are just scratching the surface, even those of us who are very much part of that world. There's this adage that when we invented planes, we invented the plane crash. And that's not a reason for us not to fly, but it is a reason for us to look pretty carefully at the plane and make really informed, intentional decisions. And I think right now, the challenges that AI presents are big and significant challenges that have the potential to impact all of our lives, both in minuscule and really, really significant ways. This can affect labor. This can affect security, global security. But in my particular world, the piece that I'm really interested in right now is the relationship and impact of AI and data infrastructure on climate. Those impacts. It remains to be seen how significant those impacts will be, but we already know that the cost, the environmental cost, is very considerable. The thing that gives me hope about AI and technology is that we are inviting more people into this conversation. We're hearing from more marginalized voices. We are feminizing technology. We are queering technology. We are decolonizing technology. And I believe that that's what is going to invite really expansive invitations into what this can be, into how technology can serve all of us and not just a select few. Less than a decade ago, data centers globally used about 30 gigawatts of electricity annually. This is roughly equivalent to the output of 30 nuclear power plants. By 2022, this had exploded, with the consumption exceeding 240 terawatts of energy annually, or the equivalent output of over 240,000 nuclear power plants. This has meant that carbon emissions have skyrocketed during the same time. One of the solutions that has been proposed to address the energy crisis and AI has been to put data centers into space. We actually already have quite a few data centers in space. If we consider things like the International Space Station and all of their network computers, a data center. We've been in space for a little while through this lens. There are proposals to create a network of data centers in space and even to put data centers on the moon. One of the things that I really appreciate, though, about who is engaging in this conversation is the invitation for reflections on Indigenous cosmologies and relationship to the sky. What does it mean for us? What does it mean for us to move into the sky, to displace our current challenges here on Earth and relocate them into new spaces? This is a conversation that has been deeply informed by Indigenous scientists and Indigenous astronomers, Indigenous storytellers. And I think that when we're having conversations that are sort of heavily rooted in technology and conversation, these are some of the first places that we need to go to turn to for reflection and wisdom. When we're considering bias and fairness in AI, we need to consider both how the algorithm is being written and also the data sets that are being input. So in one example, there was recognition that AI was filtering out a lot of applicants that had names that were traditionally associated with women. And so the organization thought that the most effective response to this would be to hide everyone's name, that would be the way to make this process fair. But what they hadn't anticipated was that when they were inputting all of the data sets, the person who was identified as historically successful within that organization tended to be middle-aged white men. And the way that their experience showed up in their CV and their cover letters, the way that their language showed up in their CV and cover letters, the machine learning learned that really, really quickly. And so because of this historical precedent of who had moved up within the organization, that just ended up being reiterated and perpetuated through machine learning. And so we really need to think about who is writing this code, what considerations are they taking when they're writing it, and then what are we feeding the machine? What's in the data and what are we teaching it around values and priorities? I'm inspired by the Kanien'kehá:ka scholar Stephen Loft, who parallels technology to a shifter, neither inherently benign nor malevolent, but always transforming the world. One of the ways that we see this showing up with AI is in its incredible potential to expand our world and to find solutions that we've never had access to before on an unprecedented scale. But conversely, AI has already has a pretty long history of being weaponized as a tool of oppression. So in the same way that we learn through our experiences and our interactions with others, we're currently teaching machines how to learn through their experiences and their interactions with both us and other machines. What we're working on right now is to try to figure out and anticipate what those machines might learn and what they might choose, how they might choose to act on what they've learned, both in ways that will serve us so well and in ways that will undermine our future. I learned about silos of expertise working in space mining. The nature of space means that to access it, you need to have these deep reservoirs of expertise. But when I went to map the risks associated with space mining, whether it had to do with biosecurity or geopolitics or space pollution, what I found was that so much of these expertise were so siloed. And that as a result of that, the risk often increased exponentially in a way that it wouldn't if there was more connection between these silos. That's a lesson that I've carried over into this work in AI. In technology, there is also this incredible depth and breadth of expertise. But because of the reach of AI, it stands to impact us across all corners of our life. And conversely, there is just this incredible wealth of knowledge and insight, both in terms of how do we approach this from a practical and technical perspective and find these solutions, but also in terms of what does responsibility mean? What does accountability mean? What does expansiveness mean in terms of inviting solutions? And so the more that I think we open the door to other voices and experiences, the richer our learning experience is going to be as we build out these systems. I used to have a professor that would say that the opposite of certainty is not uncertainty, rather it is possibility. Having the privilege to work in this space, to work with people who are excited about our future and what it may hold and where we may go, is so rich and ripe with possibility that brings me deep joy to have the privilege of both learning from them and building these relationships. I have this list of questions on my fridge that is like my guiding list of questions that I come back to as a touch point. And the question at the top of that list is, am I considering both end? And it's my reminder, or one of my reminders, for making space for the complexity of levels of interest and openness to these kinds of ideas. Another one of those questions is, am I seeing this through the most generous lens? I think that there is an invitation for engagement when we center generosity in these interactions around this work in particular. That brings up a lot of feelings for a lot of people. I think the question that I would have for folks is, what does it mean to you to be a good ancestor? How are you orienting towards the future? And what does that mean for how you're showing up now? My favorite part of being me is that I have the joy and utter delight of getting to belong to my own community.